Hello, everyone, and welcome back. We're reading Among the Impostors now, where we left off. We just found out that Jason, or as Luke has been calling him for most of the book, Jackal Boy, is actually working for the population police, and he just gave out the names of 4 boys who are third children. As Luke had heard about this because he saw him leave and kind of followed him, and that's how he found out about all this, he went to take the phone from Jackal Boy's hand and then hit him with his textbook that he had brought with him and hit him again. And right now, Jason is mostly laying unconscious, and the phone did ring again, and it was the population police saying we need to meet our quota. Oh boy, what is going to happen? So I've got about 22 pages for today and about 22 pages for tomorrow. We'll finish up this book and find out what happens. So we got about 44 total pages left. So let's go. Chapter 29. Luke slid his hands under Jason's armpits and began dragging him down the stairs. Down was easier than up, and if Jason woke up and started screaming, he'd be less likely to wake somebody up if he and Luke were on the first floor. Of course, if Jason woke up and attacked Luke, there was no less chance Luke could get to help on the first floor. Luke made himself concentrate on pulling the bigger boy. Jason's feet slipped down the first step and hit hard. Jason moaned but didn't open his eyes. Maybe he's just faking, Luke thought. Maybe he's wide awake and he's just waiting for the right moment to attack. But that thought made Luke sweat. But he pulled harder and got Jason all the way to the bottom of the steps without waking him up. Next, Luke dragged Jason down the hall. A right turn, a left turn, a right turn. Jason was heavy, and Luke's arms ached. His head ached, too, from trying the plan. He found the door he'd been looking for and forced himself to knock. Yes? A sleepy voice responded. Luke grimaced. He'd been half hoping this idea would fail. Be brave, he told himself. Nurse, he called out. It's my friend. He's sick. How could he have called Jason a friend? Oh well, he had a lot more lives ahead of him. The door eased open. The nurse stood there in a ruffled dressing gown. Oh my, she said dimly when she'd taken in the sight of Jason slumped on the floor. Luke tried to hold him up the way a concerned friend would, but it was hard. Luke would have enjoyed dropping him. He passed out, Luke said needlessly. He was having a seizure? Ranting and raving? He was telling lies, making up stories. That should help if Jason came to. I think it's called delirium, what he had. I think staying unconscious is the best thing for him. Can you give him something that'll keep him asleep? Oh my, the nurse repeated, frowning. Usually in these circumstances, we want to revive the patient. It wasn't fair. Now the nurse seemed to know what she was talking about. Help me get him inside, she ordered Luke. The nurse took Jason's legs and Luke lifted. The strain on his muscles was terrible. Luke was panting by the time they got Jason to a bed in the nurse's office. She immediately began looking him over. Did he hit his head? She asked Luke as she felt Jason's scalp. Panic bubbled up in Luke's stomach. But maybe, he said. He was, thrashing around a lot in his sleep. I thought he was ranting and raving, the nurse said, fixing Luke with an unexpectedly sharp stare. Was he doing that in his sleep, too? Luke gulped. No, he was thrashing about and then he woke up and acted delirious. Then he had a seizure and went unconscious, I think. It happened really fast. It was really scary. Luke got another idea. You know, you should really strap him down in bed so if he wakes up and starts acting weird again, he won't hurt himself. Thanks for the medical advice, the nurse said. She lifted one of Jason's eyelids and shone a flashlight into his eye. Luke held his breath. If Jason woke up now, he could tell the nurse anything he wanted, and she'd believe him. Jason was much better liar than Luke. Jason's lips moved. Had he mumbled something that the nurse could hear, but Luke couldn't? Luke tried to quell his panic. He watched with relief as Jason's eyes rolled blindly back in his head. The nurse gently placed the eyelid back against the eye. Jason didn't move. The nurse sat down at a desk and took up a pen. Now, what's your friend's name? She asked. Scott Renault, Luke said. The nurse peered at him doubtfully. And your name is? Lee Grant, Luke mumbled. The nurse was watching him carefully. Too carefully. Okay, she said. Let me type your account of your friend's injury into the computer. She disappeared around a corner. Luke could hear the nurse muttering to herself. Then there was a clickety-clack of a keyboard. The sound made him miss Jen. He remembered Jason acting so excited when Luke had mentioned her name. But that had just been an act contrived to get Luke to trust him, to reveal his name, so Jason could betray him. Luke's head spun. It was too hard to recast his memories with Jason as a traitor. The nurse came back. Sign this, she said. Disheartened, Luke signed without reading. Now, why don't you go back to bed? The nurse said to Luke. I'll take good care of your friend. I promise. That's what Luke was afraid of. But there was nothing else for him to do but back out of the door. Let me know how he is, Luke begged as he left. And if he says anything crazy, don't worry, the nurse said. I've heard plenty of crazy talk around here. Out in the hallway, Luke wished he'd thought of another plan. Ropes. He could have tied Jason up and gagged him and put him where exactly? Even the boys who stared at the ground all day would notice a bound and gagged boy lying around. And where was Luke supposed to get ropes and a gag? No, Luke had to take his chances with the nurse. He had to hurry even faster now. Who could tell what lies Jason might tell the nurse when he awoke? All Luke knew was Jason wouldn't help cast Luke as the heroic friend who carried Jason to help. Actually, Jason wouldn't even have to lie. All he had to say was that Luke had hit him with a book and knocked him down. That was true, though not the whole truth, and if anyone wanted to investigate, they could examine Luke's book. Stunned by his own stupidity, Luke raced down the hall, around the corners, and back up the stairs. He saw the history textbook cast off in the corner of the landing where he dropped it. He snatched it up and hugged it to his chest like a long-lost friend. Now to find the phone. The phone was nowhere in sight. Chapter 30. The landing was barely a 4x4 square, flat and empty, but Luke walked around it again and again as if he'd missed noticing the phone and was right there in plain sight. It wasn't. Luke looked on each stair below, and even the stairs above the landing as if the phone could fly. It took forever for his stubborn brain to accept that the phone was missing. Sorry. Then he sank down in one of the stair steps, puzzling of who might have taken it. Did Jason have an accomplice? Luke thought about the Hollanders, all the boys who had met in the woods. Now that Jason's true nature had been revealed, Luke couldn't be sure of anyone. Maybe they all worked for the population police. Except for the 4 boys Jason had betrayed. Luke was desperately confused, but he could figure out one thing. The missing phone meant those 4 were in more immediate danger, and so was Luke. Luke's first instinct was to hide, to get the other 4 to hide with him. The woods wouldn't be safe because Jason would lead the population police straight there. Was there a safe place in the kitchen? Somewhere in an unused classroom? Some dormitory off by itself? And unlikely to be searched? Hiding was no good. In the end, they'd only be found. Luke had to do something to prevent the population police from ever searching, but he didn't even understand what was going on. He had to find someone who knew more than Luke, who could lie better than Luke, who could know how to handle the population police. Jen's dad. But how was Luke supposed to reach him? Chapter 31. Luke crept back down to the first floor with only the vaguest plan in mind. He needed Mr. Talbot's phone number. He needed a phone. The school office should have both. The school office was locked. Luke stood before the ornate door for what felt like hours. The door had a glass panel at the top so he could see in easily. He could make out the shape of a phone on Miss Hawkins' desk. He could see old-fashioned file cabinets behind it. Surely there was a file in there with Luke's name on it. His fake name, anyway. Would Mr. Talbot's phone number be listed in there? Because he was the one who'd brought Luke to the school? Luke thought so, but it did no good unless Luke could get into the files. And no matter how much he jiggled the knob of the office door, the door held firm. Desperately, Luke kicked it, but the door was thick, solid maple wood, nothing flimsy at Hendrix. Even the glass was probably glass. Luke couldn't believe how stupid he was being. He slammed the glass panel with his textbook, and a satisfying spiderweb of cracks crept across it. Ooh, that's like a tongue twister there. He hit it again a little lower, smashing the portion of the panel. And Jason thinks books are useless, Luke muttered to himself. Take that. Luke covered his hand with part of his pajama sleeve and pushed through the bottom of the glass. Only a few shards fell to the ground. The rest of the panel stayed in place. It was high-quality glass. Anything cheap would have shattered completely and fallen to the ground with an enormous clatter. Luke reached on through until he could touch the knob from inside. He turned it slowly, slowly until he heard the click he'd been waiting for. He eased the door open and raced to the filing cabinet. With only the dim light from the hall, Luke couldn't read any of the labels on any of the files. He had to carry them out to the door to see whose they were. The first batch he had pulled had Jeremy Andrews through Luther Benton. He replaced them and moved farther back in the file. Tanner Fitzgerald through. Yes, there it was. Lee Grant. Luke was surprised by the thickness of his file, considering how short a time he'd been at Hendrix. The first set of papers were school transcripts from other schools, evidently the ones the real Lee Grant had attended, before he died and left his identity to Luke. There were pictures, too, 7 of them labeled kindergarten, grade 1, grade 2, all the way up through grade 6. Strangely, the photos really did look like Luke. Same sandy hair, pale eyes, worried look. Luke blinked. Think he'd been fooled. When he opened his eyes, the resemblance was still there. Had the real Lee Grant looked that much like Luke? Then Luke remembered something Jen had told him once about changing photos on the computer. You can make people look older, younger, prettier, uglier, whatever you want. If I wanted to make my own fake ID, I probably could, she bragged. But Jen had wanted to come out of hiding with her identity intact. She hated the thought of fake IDs. Staring at the faked pictures, Luke could understand it. It was all too strange. He knew he should be reassured by how thoroughly his records had been doctored, but it frightened him instead. There was no sign of the real Luke Gardner. Probably even his family would forget him eventually. Luke didn't have time for self-pity. He turned the page, hoping his admission papers wouldn't be next. They weren't. Instead, there was a sort of daily log. Luke read in horrified fascination. Student withdrawn, Shirley during entrance interview, refuses to look interviewer directly in the eye, refuses to answer questions, sullen behavior, hostility believed connected to dissociation with parents, can assume high risk of repeated attempts at running away, treatment to commence immediately. April 29th, sullenness continues, attempts at interaction rebuffed, teachers report disinterest, hostility. The log continued in that vein with an entry for every day Luke had been in Hendrix. There was repeated mention of therapy and treatment and at success or failure, but Luke had no entrance interview. He had had no therapy, no treatment, no attention from the school office officials at all. Obviously, this was another faked record. But who faked it and why? Thoroughly baffled, Luke turned the page, and there was a thick sheaf of his entrance papers. Mr. Talbot was listed in the second column of the 16th page as an emergency contact. Luke grabbed the phone and started dialing. A woman's sleepy voice answered. Is Mr. Talbot there? Luke asked. I need Mr. Talbot. It's 3 a.m, the woman hissed. Please, Luke begged. It's an emergency. I'm a friend of... He barely managed to stop himself from saying, Jen's. Mr. Talbot's phone was probably bugged by the population police. Maybe the school's phone was now, too. Luke didn't know, but he tried again. Mr. Talbot is a friend of my parents. There was only dead air in response, then a man's voice, just as sleepy as the woman's. Hello? It was Mr. Talbot. Luke wanted to spill out everything from his first confusing day at Hendrix to Jason's treachery to the oddness of the file Luke still held on his lap. If only he could explain all his problems, surely Mr. Talbot could solve them all. But Luke had to choose his words carefully. You told me to blend in, he accused, hoping Mr. Talbot would remember. I can't. You have to come get me. And 4 other boys, he added silently, as if Mr. Talbot were actually capable of telepathy. If only Luke could just say, flat out, you need to get 4 more fake IDs for these friends of mine, and you'll need to protect their families too. But Luke couldn't think of any code that would clue in Mr. Talbot without cluing in the population police as well. Now, Mr. Talbot said calmly, sounding like an elderly uncle dispensing wisdom. Surely school isn't that bad. You need to give it more of a chance. Is his finals week or something? Luke couldn't tell whether Mr. Talbot really didn't understand or whether he was acting for the sake of the bug. That's not the problem, Luke almost screamed. It's like a problem I had before. Yes, problems do seem to repeat themselves, Mr. Talbot said, still sounding untroubled. Usually there's some root cause. You need to attack that first. Was Mr. Talbot speaking in code? Luke hoped so. It's all very well to say that, he protested, but the problems are multiplying. There are 4 others now I have to think about, and they can't wait until the root cause is fixed. This is an emergency. You have to help. Luke was proud of himself. He couldn't be any clearer than that, not using a potentially bugged phone. Surely Mr. Talbot would understand. You children can be so melodramatic, Mr. Talbot said irritably. Now he sounded like a man ripped from sleep at 3 a.m. for no good reason. I have every confidence that you can deal with your problems by yourself. Now, good night. Please, Luke pleaded, but Mr. Talbot had hung up. Luke stared at the phone. He'd tried so hard. It wasn't fair that he didn't even know if he succeeded or not. No, he knew. He failed. He heard the careless tone in Mr. Talbot's voice. Luke couldn't fool himself into thinking it was all an act, with each word carrying double meaning. It was 3 a.m. He had awakened Mr. Talbot out of a dead sleep. How could he possibly have understood what Luke needed? Luke dropped the phone and put his face down on Miss Hawkins' desk. The file he'd been holding on his lap spilled onto the floor, dumping papers filled with lies. He didn't care. He didn't care that anyone walking by would catch him where he wasn't supposed to be. He was past caring about anything. Had Jen ever reached this point, planning the rally? Luke remembered the last time he'd seen her, the night she left for the capital. She seemed almost unearthly, as if she'd already passed out of the realm she shared with Luke. And she had. She was still in hiding, and she was about to risk her life to be free. It was simpler for you, Luke accused silently. You weren't confused. It was hard having a dead hero for a best friend. I just can't live up to you, Jen, he thought. I'm not you. He wasn't Lee Grand either. Slowly, just to get rid of them, he began picking up the faked papers and stuffing them back into the file, moving like someone in a dream. He put the phone back on the desk and a file back in the filing cabinet and shut the drawer. He walked out of the office and pulled the door closed behind him, making no effort whatsoever to hide the broken glass. He'd have to run away. That's all there was to it. He could take the other 4 with him. They'd just have to take their chances. They could head to the city. Luke had lost track of time now. Before he woke the others and terrified them out of their wits, he decided he'd peek outside and see how much time they had left before daylight. He went to the door they always used, the one that led to the woods, that had once led to his garden. He tried to turn the knob, but his hand must be weak with exhaustion. His fingers slipped right off. He gripped the knob again and tried harder. The door was locked. Locked from the outside. Panicked, Luke ran to the front door, the one he'd come through with Mr. Talbot that first day. It was locked too. What kind of school kept its students locked in at night? No schools, just prisons. Luke rushed around trying every door he could find, but it was hopeless. They were all locked, and none of them had a glass handle for him to break. Finally, he sank to the floor outside his history classroom. We're trapped, he thought. Trapped like rats in a hole. Luke was not the least bit surprised when he heard footsteps coming down the hall. He hardly dared look up. But it wasn't Jason or someone from the population police standing over him. It was his history teacher, Mr. Dirk. Back to bed, young man, Mr. Dirk said. I appreciate your dedication to history, but studying through the night is strictly prohibited. I'm afraid I'll have to give you, I know, Luke said, 2 demerits. Under Mr. Dirk's gaze, Luke resignedly trudged back upstairs. Chapter 34. Luke was overcome by guilt when he woke up the next morning. How could he be slept away so many hours? He'd had to come back to his room because Mr. Dirk was watching, but he could have sneaked out later. Why didn't he at least warn the others? Some rational side of his mind argued, what good would a warning do when they can't escape? Around him, his other roommates were complaining about the exams they faced that day. 1 or 2 of them had books open on their beds and were studying as they got dressed. It seemed unreal that anyone would care about exams at a time like this. Fearfully, Luke looked over at Jason's bed. It was empty. The sheets were rumpled the same way they had been last night. The pillow still held an indentation, but Jason was nowhere in sight. Where's Scott? Luke asked. His voice trembled despite his best efforts to sound casual. His question was met with blank stares. Don't know, one boy finally mumbled and went back to studying. At breakfast, Luke sat with Jason's gang, but Jason was still missing. Luke peered around the table at the 4 boys Jason had betrayed. Antonio Samuel, who had flashing dark eyes and a quick laugh. Denton Travis, who knew hundreds of riddles. Sherman Ryan, who talked with an accent like Luke had never heard before. And Patrick Tyrone, who had once claimed he had gotten his fake ID by the luck of the Irish. Luke couldn't have said he really knew any of them well, but it was agony to sit here watching them eat their cream of wheat, making jokes, totally unaware that they were doomed. Luke tried to lean over and whisper in Patrick's ear, "You're in danger. I need to tell you." But Patrick only brushed him away with the words, "Quit it, Lecker. You're bugging me." And then all the others stared at Luke. How many of them were on Jason's side, working for the population police? Luke didn't dare give his warning out loud. Breakfast time slipped away with Luke's panic only growing. His thoughts ran in circles. He should go hide by himself if he couldn't save the others. But he couldn't just abandon the others. He had to save them. But how? "If you're not going to eat your breakfast, I will," Patrick said when Luke's bowl was the only one that wasn't empty. Silently, Luke passed over the food. "Hey, thanks," Patrick said with a huge grin. "You're the greatest." If only you knew, Luke thought miserably. Just then, the dining hall door banged open. "Population, please," a booming voice called out. Luke froze. He'd known this was coming, but it still didn't seem possible. He tried to yell, "Run," to Patrick and the others, but he opened his mouth and nothing came out. His legs were frozen too. He could only sit and watch and listen in horror. A huge man stepped into the room. Metals covered his olive green uniform. He clutched a sheaf of papers in his fist. "I have a warrant here for the arrest of illegals who have compounded their crime by the use of falsified documents," he announced. Luke closed his eyes in agony. It was all over. He failed at everything. He hadn't saved the others. He hadn't saved himself. He'd never done anything for the cause. He was going to die before he had a chance to accomplish a single thing. The officer peered at the papers in his hand. He cleared his throat. "The sentence for those in violation of Population Law 3903 is death. The sentence for falsification of documents by an illegal citizen by death is death by torture. Government's choice." One of the autistic boys was crying. Luke could hear him across the room. Everyone else sat in deathly silence. Luke hoped that he'd at least have the chance to apologize to the other four. The police officer continued. "The first illegal I have come to arrest goes by the name of—" "Relax, Dan, I found him," someone interrupted from behind. Luke recognized the voice. A second later, Mr. Talbot came into the room, and behind him, with his wrists in handcuffs, his ankles in leg irons, was Jason. The entire dining hall full of boys gasped. "He was hiding in the nurse's office," Mr. Talbot was saying, "and the other one's over at the girls' school. Come on, I don't want to miss my golf game this afternoon." "No!" Jason roared. Even in chains, he had a commanding presence. The police officer with the chest full of medals turned to look at him with something like respect. "I told you, I'm not an X-nay. I can show you the X-nays." Jason stepped forward, chains rattling. Mr. Talbot reached out to grab his arm, but the officer stopped him. "Maybe he's right," the officer said. "I always love it when they betray each other, and I wouldn't mind getting a bonus for exceeding my quota this month." Mr. Talbot shrugged and looked at his watch as if all that worried him was showing up late for his tea time. Jason hobbled slowly across the room until he reached Luke's table. Luke felt faint. Everyone around him seemed to be holding his breath, too. Jason pointed. "Him. Antonio Blanco is his real name, but he goes by Samuel Ivory. Him. Denton Weathers, alias Travis Spencer. Him. Sherman Kaminsky, alias Ryan Mann. Him. Patrick Kerrigan, alias Tyrone Jansen." Now Jason pointed to Luke. "And him? I don't know his real name, but he's pretending to be Lee Grant." He turned back to the population police officer beseechingly. "And I know there's more. Just give me some time." Mr. Talbot started laughing. His guffaws rang out into the silent dining room like bells after a funeral. "Lee Grant, an imposter? Now that's a good one. I've known Lee since he was a baby. His whole family used to celebrate Christmas with mine back when we lived in the city. Come to think of it, I've got one or two of those Christmas pictures in my wallet right now. Want to see them?" Mr. Talbot asked the police officer. He was already pulling the wallet out of his back pocket. Hey Lee, good to see you. Come look. Remember the year your parents made you wear the Santa Claus hat?" Somehow Luke managed to make his legs carry him over to Mr. Talbot. Once before, Mr. Talbot had lied and said he was a close personal friend of Luke's father's cousin. That was dangerous enough. Mr. Talbot could have never backed up this lie. But the picture Mr. Talbot thrust at him was crystal clear. There was Mr. Talbot and three other adults standing by a fireplace, two boys that looked like Luke recognized as Jen's brother, Mr. Talbot's stepson, sat on the hearth. And right there between them was Luke, in a flannel shirt and a Santa hat. Mr. Talbot even flashed the photo in front of Jason's face. "But I know," Jason fumed. I'm sure of the others. I'm positive. Mm-hmm, Mr. Talbot said. I bet you just made up those names trying to save your own skin. Suddenly, Patrick Tyrone spoke up. He is, sir. My name is really Robert Jones. I'm Michael Reisert, Sherman Ryan added. The other two gave different names too, Joel Westing and John Abbott. All four boys spoke in calm, even voices. Luke was stunned. What was going on? How could they possibly pull this off? They're lying! Look at their records, Jason screamed. Good idea, Mr. Talbot said. Is there a teacher administrator who'd be so kind? At a far table, Luke's history teacher, Mr. Dirk, stood up. Just give me a minute, he said. Luke wondered how he could have ever found the man intimidating. He scurried out of the room like a mouse. In no time at all, he returned with 4 thick files. He handed them to the police officer. Mind, please don't let any of these boys see. We like to keep their records private. But everyone was craning his neck, straining to see. Luke had the advantage because he was still standing next to Mr. Talbot. The police officer flipped quickly through the top file. Luke could see Michael written again and again in each file. And on the next file, it was Robert over and over again. They're fake, Jason howled. Oh, who could have faked these in the 2 minutes we were standing here? The police officer said in disgust. He threw the files down on the table and jerked on Jason's arm. Come on, out of here. Enough with your lies. You better go make that other pickup quick, or Mr. Talbot here will make me reimburse him for his lost screens time. But, Jason sputtered all the way out of the dining room. Then he and Mr. Talbot and the population police officer were gone. And we've got one last bit for tomorrow, and that'll be the end of our book. So join me next time.